Hello, welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the Tank Talk podcast. I am flying kind of solo today. Jason's not with me because he had other obligations, but it's okay because I've got a very special guest on this episode all the way from the UK. Tom Noble from Vitalis is here. We are going to talk all about Vitalis, the brand, but also fish keeping, fish nutrition. And I got to tell y'all, anybody that's listening right now, you're in for a treat because Tom and I have been talking briefly before we started, and I had to tell him, hey, let's slow down here because you're saying all this really good stuff and I want to get this recorded. I don't want to miss any of this. So it's going to be a jam-packed episode. I think it's going to be something that a lot of people are going to get quite a bit of education out of. So Tom, thank you for coming on with me. It's later in the day there for you over in the UK, so appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No problem, John. Thank you for having me on, and it's really nice to be coming over to the States again. I'm actually visiting the States in a week or so's time to see some customers of ours over there. So it's great to get out to the audience, and thank you for having me on again.
Oh, it's our pleasure, and Jason's going to be very upset that he wasn't able to join us today because he is much more of a science geek than I am. He would probably have all the scientific questions for you, but I kind of yeah, but and that's why him and I do well together. I'm just the dumb guy that likes to keep glass boxes full of water. He does that too, but he's also the highly educated guy. But that's okay. I'm going to try to fill his shoes as good as I can. I want to start off with, what is Vitalis?
Yeah, so the premise of what we do is really, if you want to put it down to one sentence, it's we want to feed fish better. That was our philosophy from the start. And it was a guy called Mark Wilson, who's the founder of our company and a colleague of mine now, who had the idea about going into the nutrition side of what we were doing, and that was based on his hatchery work. So he was breeding back then hundreds of thousands of clownfish, things like seahorses, and this is back in the late 80s, early 90s. And he went to work for one of the big fish wholesalers in the UK, and they gave him a budget to set up a hatchery, and it went from there. His challenge, though, was that he couldn't find the right foods. So this is where our kind of initial inspiration on the food came in. And I think what it showed us was there was a lot of talk about filtration, even behavior of fish, things like that, but there wasn't so much focus on the nutrition side, and this was where we saw a kind of a gap in the market. We looked at aquaculture foods, we looked at the pet side, if you like, and there was nothing there that could do the job for Mark, really, for the breeding side. And that's a real kind of telltale sign of, is the nutrition good enough if you're getting the fish to breed? So that's where the idea for Vitalis came along. And then when we started, the initial thing was to look at what we wanted to get into these fish. So we wanted to look at the ingredients initially, what kind of balanced diets and nutritional requirements were there for these animals. You've obviously got the requirements for marine species, reef species, which pretty much live in all similar ecosystems, whereas if you look at the freshwater side, you've got quite a few different ecosystems, different water conditions. You've got lakes, you've got rivers, you've got lots of different things going on, so that we do a wider range of foods for the freshwater side than we do for the marine, for that reason, really. But the ingredients were really, really key. We wanted to get the highest quality and probably the biggest key, digestible ingredients for these animals. So Mark worked with a colleague of ours, John, who does some consultancy for us, and he's in his 80s now, but he's one of the most published fish nutritionists. He's an amazing guy. He's worked in pet aquaculture, all sorts down the lines on different species, shrimp, fish, lots of different things. So he got together with Mark, and they found and sourced some of the best ingredients you can get. Some of which are human food grade, which again is not that common, shall we say, in pet food. And they're all highly digestible. Some are very, very expensive, but again, we didn't want to look at it initially from a price point of view. We wanted to look at what the best thing for the fish was. And then the next step was, okay, well, we want to put these ingredients into a fish food and make it into a pellet or a flake, or in some cases a grazer, which is one of our things that we do. But how do you do that without destroying those ingredients that you've just spent all that time trying to source, all that time thinking about, is that appropriate for the fish? And the machinery that was available for that, and is still done in most cases on these machines, and this is all pet food, whether it's dog, cat biscuits or kibbles, as you would call them. It bakes the food. It takes it up to a very, very high temperature. It's steam driven, and that's where you get hard baked pellets or hard baked kibbles. But this, for us, would destroy a lot of the ingredients we've just spent a lot of money on. And so we ended up having to relook at it and actually design our own machinery from scratch. So that's where, when you ask me what Vitalis is, that's what it is. It's a fish food that is made on a unique piece of machinery to produce a food that is nutritionally intact with very, very high quality ingredients. And because we don't use heat, or it generates heat a bit because you've got shear in there and stuff like that, but you don't use heat in it, you're not destroying a lot of the nutrition you've originally put in. And on the pellet side and the grazer, which I can explain a bit more about in a bit, that produces a soft pellet as well. So when you see our pellets, they're soft, they're malleable. You can even get them together and mold them into a ball and stick them on the glass if you want. It's a different thing. So we always say, if you get it in people's hands, that's when they see it's different. It also smells, well, perhaps not good necessarily to all people, but it smells good to the fish. And that's where the attractant side comes in. So that's kind of in a nutshell what Vitalis is about. Ingredients. It's about how we process those ingredients to get them into the fish in a captive environment. And I think the last piece of the jigsaw is really how we then contain that so that when it goes into the water, it doesn't leach out before it's eaten. And then also the highly digestible nature of the food means that there is less waste. And both of those things have a huge impact on your water quality. And so that's where we kind of came into the marketplace and looked at what was out there and how we could differentiate ourselves. But we also then ended up going into initially 2 different marketplaces in a way. We went into the retail side, obviously the pet sector, and we also went into the public aquarium sector, which we had relationships with different people in different public aquariums around the world as well. So these are 2 slightly different ways of feeding fish in a way, but there's a lot of synergy, there's a lot of similarity as well.
As you were talking about this, the first thing that comes to mind, to look at me, it's quite obvious I'm not a fitness guru. My podcast co-host is, but every single person, I always like to do a human analogy when it comes to these kind of things. And every single person that would try to educate someone on getting themselves healthy and get themselves in shape, they would all say it's 90% diet and 10% exercise and moving your body. I feel like that certainly applies here. And I think you're right. I think that so many people, including myself, should put a priority on the nutrition side of things, but maybe are more drawn to the fancy new lights and the apps and all of these things. And we neglect nutrition. So I'm glad to hear. I'm glad to hear that you're doing that. And but to get into kind of how Vitalis came to the United States, I know you're a big brand in the UK, but your introduction into the States was through public aquariums, right? I mean, and is
Yeah,
that how you came in with
yeah,
Fritz to
it
team up with
was.
them?
Yeah, in fact, it was something that we were doing over here in Europe with the public aquariums as well. And Vitalis came to the States first, just in the public aquarium industry, and we were connecting with some of the guys that we knew. And really, again, with that side of things, their traditional way of feeding was using wet fish, frozen food, sometimes live food, um, and this doesn't always work that well for them, shall we say? And the reason that is because just because the tank is huge, it might be a 6 million gallon aquarium. The principles are the same as a nano tank or your small sort of 2 foot aquarium. It's the same principle that the filtration will only cope with so much. And when you've got these big animals in there and there's a lot of fish in there and you're trying to feed them all and get the right calories into them and the right nutrition, that puts a lot of pressure on your filter. If you're using wet fish and frozen food, it's 90% water, it leaches out a lot. There are nutritional components within it that collectively kind of go together just about to make a diet, but you haven't got all of the vitamins and minerals and things like that. So we've tried to change the way that the aquariums think about that and make them realize that in captivity, at least, you need to give them a formulated diet because it covers all the nutritional bases that they need. And in our case, and this works in a small home aquarium or it works in a huge public aquarium, the water quality significantly improves because of the way that we hold the food together before it's been eaten. So it'll sit in water for around 24 hours before you're going to start to get problems with your water quality. Obviously, it's supposed to be eaten by then. So if it's still in there 24 hours later, you're probably overfed. But the point being is it locks. This is a unique thing to us, the way we do it at least. And then because it's highly digestible, it doesn't produce as much waste. It produces waste because that's a natural process. You can't help that. But they're using more of the food. So therefore, the water quality improves in the public aquariums significantly. They can also get the calories into the animals, enough calories into these animals, and they're moving around a lot. You can see a lot of the species are quite highly active. And you can get the calories in without destroying your water quality. So that's where the public aquariums see big strides and benefits. I mean, we deal with aquariums around the world. We deal with quite a few in the States now. Again, people getting slowly more back on board with it. But we're now feeding a manta ray in SeaWorld Abu Dhabi with our
Whoa.
marine flake. We
With
feed
flakes? A
some,
manta ray with flakes?
yeah, they do mix. And again, this is another key part of nutrition is presentation. So sometimes it's texture, sometimes it's what color it is, all of this stuff that has a bearing on whether fish will eat it initially. And in this case, obviously, manta are used to eating krill because that's kind of what they eat in the wild. But um, in order to get the texture right, they mixed it. They mixed the flake with a bit of krill, right? So it kind of makes what we call a porridge, you call an oatmeal of flake and krill, which frozen krill, and then that gets the texture right. But what you're putting in with the flake, bear in mind that's dry and the frozen food is 90% water. If you do by weight the 50-50 mix, you've got a lot more Vitalis going in there than you have krill in terms of what the nutritional part is. And then that way it kind of gets the nutrition, as I said, the vitamins, minerals, all of that stuff, and the calories into the animal that they haven't been able to do with just using the krill. And they mix it together. They put it in a little, like a paint pail bucket, train it to come up to the top, tip it into its mouth, and they do the same with that. They've got a shoal of mobula rays with a calf bottle,
Oh, that's
and
adorable.
they just train them to come around in a circle. The aquarists getting them into their waist height, one shot for each one, and then the next one comes around. It's an amazing thing to see. It's not something we're allowed to film, but it's
Oh,
it's fantastic. I'm hoping we might be able to work with Georgia on theirs as well. I've been talking to them. In fact, I'm visiting them soon to see if we can try the same thing. But it's stuff like that that makes a big difference to keeping animals in captivity, really, and making them thrive, I suppose. And nutrition is a huge part of that. It's the biggest pollutant you're going to put in your tank. It has a bearing on all your filtration, everything like that. So it is quite a big part of the picture.
now I've been to, this is going to sound like a question a 4-year-old would ask you, but it's something I've genuinely never seen. I've been to a lot of public aquariums. The most recent one was the Shed Aquarium in Chicago, which was very impressive. I'm not sure if you work with them, but this question would apply to any of them. One of the most exciting things about feeding fish in an aquarium, I keep a lot of African cichlids, and when I walk up to the tank, all the fish go crazy and they come up because they know it's feeding time. They see that big blurry thing walk up. They know it's feeding time. Does that happen at public aquariums? I've never been to a public aquarium at feeding time. Do they all frenzy around like they know it's
They
feeding time?
they do. Well, first of all, we do work with Shed, and I know Shed's going through like a big renovation program at the moment, which is going to be fantastic when it's completed, I think. Yes, they do, but it's actually an interesting point because that reaction, if you like, sometimes if they're fed the frozen food, what happens to the animal? And this is the same with your fish at home, whether it doesn't matter what kind of type, whether it's fresh water, whether it's salt water, whatever. But when they're fed the frozen food, this 90% water that I keep talking about goes into the stomach, bloats the stomach out, fills the stomach. Yeah, the animal feels like it's full. The water disappears quite quickly, leaving only 10%, which is actually the food, which is the thing that's going to keep them sustained and going. So they're hungry again. So that feeding frenzy sometimes, there's two things, there's 2 points. There's one is that they recognize when they're going to get fed. They're not as stupid as as a lot of people might think. But secondly, when they're really, really hungry and they keep having this up and down or expanding stomach, then shrinking, expand, they're always hungry, so that it does create more of a frenzy. So I guess in a display sense, that's fine. But when you actually realize what's happening, when you feed Vitalis to them and they get full, it fills the stomach out with 100% nutrition. Well, there's a bit of moisture in it because it's a moist pellet. So let's say it's 90% nutrition, 10% water. You've got a different reaction after 2 or 3 weeks. When their metabolism gets used to it, they're calmer. You don't get quite the same frenzy, but that's because their calorie levels is leveling out, and they're not as aggressive. It also helps with the kind of hierarchy and bullying scenarios that I mean, you talked about African cichlids. They're classic for that. I'm not going to
Oh,
say
yeah.
that feeding Vitalis will stop the aggression entirely because they are aggressive fish, but it does calm them down. And that's one of the real keys with this, but watching the behavior of the animals and working out how that relates to the nutrition as well.
That's really interesting because I started my online career, if you will, on African cichlids, and I would have never thought feeding them the right food will help. Nothing's going to get rid of aggression on African cichlids.
No,
That's just not possible.
no.
But could help that a little bit. That's never been something that's occurred to me. You're teaching me things here, and I love that. There may be people that hear that and think, well, that's my favorite part is when the fish come up and they're crazy and they're
Yeah,
begging. So I don't want to get rid of that, but that's a really good
it,
point. That
don't get me
if they
wrong, it
don't
doesn't.
freak out, that's a happy fish.
Yeah, there's still, if you've got fish at home, they'll still recognize you and they'll still recognize it's feeding time and stuff like that. But what it does, it just calms the process down a bit. So you're not having that kind of, and in the aquarium, the big public aquarium sense, some of these animals are big animals. So if they're in a feeding frenzy and they're hitting each other and accidentally knocking into each other, it's difficult.
One of the things, and I just had a little bit of an internet problem, audience. So that's why there's the hard edit there. Sorry about that. But one of the things that Mike Noche from Fritz was talking to me about, that Fritz Industries is the one that has brought in Vitalis and made it available to retail here in the States. He was talking about a particular fish, and I don't recall because my memory is terrible, that is in the public aquariums, that a specific type of feeder fish has to be grown for because that's all they'll eat. And the producers of the fish that are being fed to that are kind of stuffed with Vitalis too. You have any idea what I'm talking about here?
Yeah, yeah. I'm to be honest, I'm not entirely sure which fish it would be because obviously there's a lot of different types of fish in the aquariums that they keep that do have that. Yeah, so you often with live feed, so shrimps and things like that, what people will do if they won't take Vitalis straight, if you want to call it that, um, because they're so uh, developed evolutionary wise to key on movement and live movement if you want. There's not that many that won't take it, but what they'll do is they'll feed the shrimp that they're going to feed to the predatory animal. They'll feed that with the flake, for example, and do what's called gut loading, so that they then feed it as soon as that's been consumed. They feed the animal, the shrimp to the animal, and that way it stops the shrimp digesting it and it gets it into the animal without it being digested. So that is a way of doing it with some of the really difficult species where they have to do that. So things like sometimes like the weedy sea dragons and things like that, they might feed them a live mysid, for example, where there they can kind of load them with some good quality stuff to get that nutrition into the animal.
Spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down.
Yeah.
That's the perfect application there. I like it. And speaking, this is not medicine, but that's kind of led me into something that I know for certain we've already talked about. People are going to ask about, and it's something I'm genuinely concerned about, or not concerned, but curious about. One of the things that the manufacturers that bake their fish foods, one of the points there is baking it removes any type of contaminants that might be in there,
Yeah.
bacteria, parasites, things like that. So what are we working with here? If you're not cooking it and cooking all that stuff out, how are we at Vitalis preventing that to make sure we're not transferring that to
Yeah.
our fish?
Yeah, that is a good question. And it's actually also the reason why the technology, the original technology was developed was to sterilize let's say the ingredients or the raw materials or whatever you want to call it, because it needed sterilization. Um, the way we kind of do things, the quality of the ingredients that we buy in are at a standard and treated in a way that is, in most cases, for human consumption. So they are already clean, shall we say, um, by the process that they've been through previous to that. but they haven't been heat treated. They've been dried in a certain way that basically stops any of the bacterial growth and things like that within it. And so we do use a method of preservation within the food, but again, it's natural food ingredient. It's not anything that's nasty, if you want to call it that. And that way we can put the food through the machine without taking it up to those temperatures that sterilize it. The other thing is, just as a safeguard and a good practice, if you want to call it that, we send every batch that we make in our factory is tested by an independent test house for things like salmonella and enterobacter, and nothing gets released from our factory until that certificate comes back saying, this is all clean, all good, no problems, it's all been tested. I mean, so in some countries that's a veterinary requirement when we're exporting to those, but we do that as part of good practice anyway, even in our own country where you don't technically have to do that because we're not exporting it.
That's good to know. I mean, I've been feeding Vitalis for 6 months now because we were sent some to test out and stuff like that way before it was even available for sale in the United States. And I mean, my fish have been nothing but delighted with that. But one of the interesting questions that I have always been, again, curious about, and this goes back to the public aquarium side of things. I look at these Oscars that I have, and I have Bashirs, bikers. I don't know what you call them over there in the UK, but they're kind of particular. They like food that's floating. They're big cichlids, and they like to very slowly go up. My fish are like 6 years old. They're lazy. But I also, when I do feed the Vitalis, a lot of it gets past the Oscars because, again, they're lazy. They want their food to be floating. But it goes down to the bikers, and they eat it, and they love it. So that's fine. But how do we address that in bigger fish? Because in community fish, well, then feed flakes. That's no big deal. That's easy. But what are we doing for the big fish like arapimas and big datnoids and things like that? What kind of pellets are we feeding them, and how big are they?
Okay, so the biggest pellets we actually we do some ones in aquaculture. They're about 18 millimeters. So what's that? I suppose
probably about as big as that bottle cap.
It's a bit, I mean, it's a three. It's like, I guess it's 3/4 inch or something like that. So that's the sort of size that we make now. In reference to the floating versus sinking side of things, we only make sinking pellets because we don't use steam, and it's the steam that puts the air pockets in the pellet that makes it float, for example. But that, and again, it's hard bait, so it's slightly different. The smaller ones, they just crush them up and make a crumb. Ours don't do that because it's dense, because of the way that it works. It also, that is one of the reasons you tend to feed less Vitalis than you do other dried foods, because there's no air in it. So it's more kind of concentrated in one way. But the way that we've trained, and again, some of this is training with fish, and I can't say for definite, depending on how conditioned they are on one thing. And this, the thing that you mentioned, if they've been in a tank for a long time, they've only been fed something for 10 years, it's a hard thing to break. It's like with humans, if they know what they like, and they're not going to be broken on that. So it doesn't work all the time, particularly on older fish. But with our pellets, what we found in the public aquariums where they're feeding bigger fish, to start with, they squash the pellet, make it more into a disc, and then it kind of floats or goes down slower. They did this with lionfish, for example, the volatile lionfish, when they were trying to get that to take the pellets. When they see it going down slower, they're more likely to at least go for a bite. Once they realize it's food and that smell relates to that, then you don't have to squash them anymore. They just go bang, bang, bang. As soon as they hit near them, it starts to do that. So that is a way of training the fish around that. Now, I know that's not ideal. In some ways you go, okay, well, why don't you do a floating pellet? The reason is because we don't do the machinery, or don't use the machinery that makes floating pellets. We've got some other ideas about how we could do that within our food, but we're still sort of developing those. But it's a good point, because that is all about the presentation. The presentation of the food is key. And as you said, you can go to flake with some of the smaller fish, it's fine because it floats around in front of the face. Sometimes if you take our tropical freshwater flake and our tropical freshwater 1 millimeter pellet, the small stuff for the community stuff, they're nutritionally almost identical. But some fish will only take the flake, some fish will only take the pellet, and that's just to do with the way it moves. Is why we produce grazing foods as well. So the grazing food is something that was originally unique to us. I think a few other people have had a go at doing a version for themselves, but we create grazers because this, in a lot of cases, is a natural way for the fish to feed, and it's a good presentation for certain fish, both in reef systems and in freshwater systems. There's certain fish that will much more readily nibble at a surface than they will take stuff out of the water, or feed from the bottom. So that's, again, it's a different presentation, and it's how you get to feed tanks with multiple different types of species. Some you put your grazer in for certain species, you do your sinking pellet for others, you've got flake surface or in the water for others, and then it covers all the bases, and it kind of splits them out into groups, and you can make sure that everybody gets food. The other thing with the grazers is that they're there the whole day. So you can actually set up, if you've got a bigger tank, you can set up multiple grazing stations. It splits the big fish away from each other. So they'll go and feed on this station, and then some of the smaller fish get a chance. And again, when they fill themselves up, the aggression calms down. So they're more likely to let the smaller fish have food. And that way your whole tank stays healthier, and you get less of the kind of fish that get bullied into not being able to have any food. So the graze is a very kind of useful and powerful way of feeding fish. And it's down to the way that we make the food and make it so that it doesn't deteriorate in water quickly, so you can actually have a piece of food in the tank for the whole day, and you're not going to end up with your water quality going completely out the window. So it's really an important part of why we can make a grazer.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because there would be a lot of people in our audience that would hear that, leave it in there all day, and they would be thinking, oh no, can't do that. But if the food is made the right way, I suppose you can. There's so many people that would say, oh, if the fish don't eat it, get it out of there so that you don't cause more problems down the road. But again,
that would be true. That would be true at the end of the day. So, for example, if half of it was still left at the end of the day, now that they've only eaten half, then you would take the stuff left out, because you don't really want it in there overnight. Most fish aren't feeding overnight. So, but actually what that's telling you is that you've probably given them too much in the first place. You can cut it down, or we're actually in the process of, for the hobby, developing a smaller version of our grazer as well. So it will be called a grazing pellet, and that it will come in that you drop it into a little holder, and this is designed for more kind of your 2 foot, 3 foot tanks, rather than the grazing rings, which tend to be more food, therefore, they're for bigger tanks.
Gotcha. When I was talking again to Mike Noche about this, and I told him about my feeding routine of this tank here behind me, where I've got some top feeders and some bottom feeders, and then a common pleco that just wreaks havoc everywhere.
Yeah.
He said, "Oh, don't tell Tom that you're feeding floating pellets to your Oscars, because he's going to tell you all the reasons. And I want you to tell me, there's reasons against floating pellets, and what is that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, fish, some fish do feed at the surface. So if it's an archer fish, for example, that's what they
Right.
do. So that's fine. And in that sense, yeah, that's why some fish take flake off the surface. But a lot of the time, they will take air in when that's not really ideal for them to do that if they're not really designed to eat from the surface. But that's kind of their only choice. Even with our flakes, we normally say, look, break them up, get them under the water, and let them move around. They won't sink straight away, but they will move around. But that way, they're not taking air in when they're gulping. An interesting scenario is when we did some work with koi carp, and all the koi carp keepers want to put their floating pellets out there and have the display that you talked about, that
Oh yeah,
this is the feeding frenzy and look at
it's the
how
best part.
big the fish are, that's why I get that from a human perspective. But actually, as a koi, the mouth part's like that. It's more like a cat. It's designed. They feed in the mud at the bottom of the lake. That's how they've evolved to feed. And when they're stretching they haven't really got a neck, but their head backwards, and they're trying to get that kind of almost digger-like mouth up that way to feed on floating pellets. It actually doesn't help them very much. But from a human perspective, it's great.
Yeah,
So,
and when he told me that, he gave me the koi example. And so, I feed floating pellets. I have 5 koi in a pond in my house here, and every time I've fed them since then, I've thought about that, like, oh man. And the thing that bothers me when feeding koi is, like you said, their mouth is kind of on the bottom of their head, and so they just kind of lean back and they suck it all in, and sometimes they don't even get any pellets
yeah,
in. And so I'm like, oh, the poor thing. I've got a couple that are 30 inches, and I'm
yeah,
like, they're doing all that work and they're not even getting any of the pellets in. But it never really occurred to me, oh, they're also drawing in all of that air, and that could be a problem. So but it's also not just air from the atmosphere, but also there's air in the pellets too, right? To make them float.
yeah. There is. Obviously, that's relatively speaking is less the air in the pellets, but I think a lot of, and this is why I like people to kind of just think about what they're doing and why they do it. A lot of, like yourself, you didn't realize that,
Right.
and that's completely fine. That's normal. It's completely fine. But when you do know these things, it gets you thinking in a slightly different way. A lot of nutrition is like that. A lot of people feed stuff because that's what they've always done, or that's what the hobby has always done. So it must be right. It's what I was told to do by my shop, or this was the bag that I took home, so this is fine, or this is the pot I took home, and that's fine. But actually, when you link into what you're doing and what animal you're keeping and what you're then deciding to feed that animal, it's quite um, interesting when you put some ideas to people that they've clearly just never thought about, but it makes sense to them when you say
Mm-hmm.
it. This is the frozen food argument, that the nutritional frozen food argument. Even with the aquariums, it's, oh well, yeah, but it's natural.
Mm-hmm.
But I go, what is natural about feeding something from a salt lake to a reef fish or even a freshwater fish? At what point is that natural? Because it looks like a shrimp. But actually, what you're not taking into account is the ecosystem of the animal that you're has evolved in. Even if it's a captive bred one, genetically, it's still predisposed to certain things. You're not thinking about it from a holistic perspective, as I said, with all the vitamins and minerals that you need to have in captivity. there's so in essence, what is natural? Um, it's not quite the way that people see it a lot of the time, and I think people just don't realize that, and I understand why they don't realize that. It's completely normal. Why would you realize it unless you make fish food?
Right. Well, and the industry kind of forces us to be that way. I mean, here, at least here in the States, like what you would hear over and over and over again is what you just said. Well, I feed frozen foods because it is the best. It's just that shrimp in its whole form, frozen, not taking into account that they're feeding their fish ice cubes. I mean, I'm not necessarily against frozen foods, but you know, it's that automatic thing for us. It's instinctual almost. Well, it's just a frozen shrimp or a frozen whatever, and so that's gonna be the best thing for us. And again, we've been trained to feel this way.
Yeah,
I don't know in the United States. I don't even know if a sinking koi pellet exists. I think every single
it
pellet
probably
is
doesn't.
floating.
Yeah, it probably doesn't. I know that there are sinking koi pellets over here, but they aren't as popular for the reasons that we've just talked about. But I think
Y'all know better
that
than us.
well, no, I wouldn't say that. But I think it's just something again that some of the probably the real keen hobbyists who got swimming pool sized ponds with loads of very expensive koi look into it a bit more, and they do realize that they like to feed on the bottom and stuff like that. But it just doesn't create the display. So it's just it's again it's an interesting thing. This is not me coming on, and even with the frozen food, look, it actually got the marine hobby off the ground. It made it possible to feed certain fish that people were struggling to do so because of the presentation. It does look like a shrimp, so it gets that feeding response. That there's no question about that. And in that sense, you could say, well, okay, from a treat perspective, there are certain nutritional components, shrimp shell and stuff like that, which obviously we put in Vitalis, but they are part of some of the frozen food. But actually, when you look at how you want to develop the hobby, everyone talks about, oh, I've developed my lighting now. This has gone from halide lighting to LED to whatever, and the technology is there, and you've got all of that, and you can set your day and night and all of these things. And then you've got your filtration, and you've got how the different filtration medias work and different versions of those. And in the marine side, you've got skimmers and you've got all of that stuff. And that's evolving, and these things work. But how I always say, well, how's food evolving? What's happening there? And that's where we're trying to come into, uh, I suppose, again, change it, but also give people an alternative to what has always traditionally been, I suppose. So,
Well, and the for manufacturers in North America, or not even North America, because so many of them are manufactured in Asia or whatever. It doesn't matter, but they all are basically done the same way, except different ingredients. This
yeah,
company has a better formula, and this and that and this and that. It's really cool to see somebody come out and kind of turn the industry upside down and say, hey, we're going to do things differently. And the very first thing I noticed about Vitalis is the fact that it's squishy, which
yeah,
that was a complete shock when I saw that at first, and that was neat. And so I love seeing that kind of, hey, we're gonna prioritize what works best for the fish, and we're gonna do things differently than what everybody else is doing. Doesn't mean that everybody else is doing it wrong. It just means, it's a different philosophy, and I respect that. I appreciate it.
yeah. I think, I mean, the hobby is you can talk to 10 different hobbyists and say, what's your best light? And they'll all probably give you a different answer.
Oh
But
yeah.
that's part and parcel of the hobby, and it's part of the beauty of the hobby, isn't it? It's probably
Yep.
the agreements or disagreements between. But I think we needed to look at it and go, right, well, this is something different in the nutritional field. And as I said, different things come up all the time with filtration, different things come up all the time with lighting, etc., etc. It's no different to that, really. But I think we want to give people the reasons behind why we've made the decisions we've made and why their food looks like it does, and what they can do with it. The grazing, the presentation, even with the soft pellets, molding them together in a ball if they want to create their own grazer and sticking it on a rock. It's those sorts of things to just give people an idea of what they can do with Vitalis and why that we've designed it in that way.
I love it. I have one more fish food type that I want to ask you about. Uh, and it might be one of those things that makes you cringe in your seat there. I don't know, but we haven't talked about it at all in this conversation, and that's freeze dried food. Uh,
Okay.
what are your feelings about that? I mean, there's so many people that would swear by that's the way to go.
Yeah. Again, I think the principle of it, in terms of its natural, a bit like with the frozen stuff, it's the same situation, because it is a an animal, if you want to call it that. You can see it's a whole animal most of the time. I think we've looked at freeze dried ingredients actually from to see if we can put certain things within foods. Where we came up against issues was freeze dried food, the oils in it or the fats inside that food, are very difficult to preserve. So it can end up going rancid quite quickly, and so you've got that kind of nutritional challenge. But again, like the frozen food, it's a component. So when I said we looked at it as an ingredient, we wouldn't make a single ingredient food. You would use it as part of a mix of things, like we do with the shrimp and the squid and the fish, and that you mix them together to make a complete diet. So it still has those challenges. And some people say, okay, well, I'll mix four different types. But it's still, looking at it from a purely fish nutrition point of view, you've got to get the balance right. It's like your meal at home. You've got to get your balance between your protein, your carbohydrate, and you're getting your vegetables for your vitamins. That's some people struggle to do that for themselves, let alone for the fish. It's quite hard.
I know that struggle.
So that again, freeze dried is, I would say, along the lines of frozen. It doesn't have the water issue that we talked about and the leaching issue in that sense. But our experience of it has said that we wouldn't use it in our foods, at least, because we need to make sure that our foods are going to be clean and not have rancid oils in them, for obvious reasons, because of the way we produce.
When I was 19 and dumb, I'm still kind of dumb, but I was, we're talking a very long time ago. Everybody was feeding their fish live feeder fish, and even back then I did it because I thought that's what we had to do, but I hated it, and so I went to, again, not being educated, thinking, well, I'm going to give them the next best thing, and I'm going to give them freeze dried krill, the jumbo krill,
Yeah.
which I still have. I had a can of. I will throw in once a week or so for my
Yeah.
Oscars here. Certainly don't feed it as a staple diet, but I actually don't feed it at all anymore because my cat knocked it over and ate the entire contents.
That
Great
doesn't
cat
surprise
food.
me.
It was a delicacy for him, but again, it goes back to what you've been talking about the whole time. That's what I thought was the right thing to do. I didn't have any reason to feel that way. I just thought, well, this is the next best thing. Even though I know better now, I know feeding live feeder goldfish is probably the worst possible thing you could do. Everything we've talked about today, whether it be bacteria, parasites, that all of that is at risk with very little nutritional value. My audience is starting to cringe in their seat right now, thinking, "Oh, John's going to go on a whole live fish rant here." I'm not. I think we've covered the reasons why that doesn't make sense to do that anyway. But because I didn't know any better, I just went on thinking, well, this is the next best thing. It may not be as good as feeding live feeders, but it's easier to watch. I don't feel as guilty, and the fish is getting what they need. Here we are 30 years later, knowing that that might not be the best choice.
I think the again, to put it in like a human perspective, people eat lots of different things. And not everything is just because they eat it isn't the best for them.
Right.
And I think again, fish in some ways are no different. They will eat certain things, and you can't ask them, but they might look like they're enjoying it. But actually, in the long run, it's something that might not be that good for them. Actually, a very good example of that is with when an animal in a public aquarium, if an animal dies, the vets quite often cut it open and see what's happened and diagnose this. This doesn't happen in the hobby very often,
Mm-mm.
but it's an interesting thing because when an animal has been fed a lot of frozen food, most of those frozen feeds or the species are often from temperate areas. Now that means that the oil profile within those, or the fat profile, oil profile, is designed evolutionary wise to cope with colder water. So it tends to be thicker, in essence, thicker oil, stop things freezing, stop them getting cold. You feed that to a tropical species, they don't need that density and they don't need that concentration of lipid, um, and that's more omega-3. I think I'm correct in, I'd have to check with Mark, but I think that's more omega-3 heavy compared to omega-6. And the tropical ecosystems are the other way around. So when they cut open fish that have been fed frozen food for a long time, they find big fat deposits around the liver and the kidney and stuff like that, which you couldn't see from the outside. As far as a hobbyist would be concerned, the fish has died, but they've not realised that there's a contribution from what it's been fed that only comes out after it's died. You could say
Wow.
the same with people. It's a bit like somebody who's had a heart attack. They might
Yep.
outwardly you might not notice it, but inwardly it's the same thing.
Found out they've been eating Big Macs 3 times a day for 20 years, and that's probably the
There you go.
equivalent.
Yeah.
So to kind of wrap up, and I don't want to do a sales pitch here, but to kind of wrap things up, the big thing with this brand is, first of all, it's a difference in philosophy in the way the food is manufactured, the ingredients that are used in the manufacturing process. That process, and correct me if I'm wrong of any of this stuff, that process provides a food that's more dense as far as the nutritional value of it, which means the fish will eat less, which means you, the consumer, are saving money. You don't have to feed as much. This isn't a cheap fish food, but you're not feeding as much, so a can of food will go longer. And because more of it is being digested and consumed by the fish, it's going to affect the water quality less than some of your other foods out there. What am I missing? What else in the sales pitch am I missing here?
I think, well, uh, as you explained to me, John, most of your followers are freshwater guys. I think it's important to note that we do make a distinction in our formulations between marine and freshwater. I see some packages of fish food where it's got
Both of
reef
them.
fish and cichlids or whatever. We don't do it in that way. So some of the components are the same, but there's definite differentiation in what what we do for freshwater versus marine. And then within freshwater, there's differentiations in certain things like protein levels. And one big thing is minerals. So the marine fish drink the minerals because they've got salt in the water all around them. They get a lot of minerals from that. Fresh water, even in a rift lake, for example, which is high in, relatively speaking, in minerals, they can't get enough minerals from the water in fresh water. So our mineral profile is very different. And then you've got the difference between the more herbivorous end and the carnivorous end in the protein levels, etc., etc. So we do make different formulas. Some are quite wide ranging. They will cover quite a lot of species. But again, particularly that saltwater freshwater difference is quite key to us.
And as far as koi go, because you've really piqued my interest there. Like I said, I've got 5, and they're in a pond with comet and common goldfish. You don't make a koi specific formula, do you, or is it just not available to us yet?
No, we did. We only had it in the UK, and we did actually stop doing it just because in the UK there wasn't enough people at that high end. As you explained, it's quite an expensive fish food. So when you're trying to sell that in a 44-pound bucket, it becomes very expensive. Now, curiously, some of the guys that did really get on well with it, but unfortunately, commercially, there weren't enough of them. They showed that they were actually using in a season about 40% less food than compared to their previous pellet. And that's a bit of what you were talking about just a minute ago. But I know Mark, our founder who I was talking about, and you don't get him on camera very often, but he is very a very interesting guy. But I know he wants another crack at the koi food. So at the moment we don't do one, but I think it's in the pipeline. He's got koi at home as well, so he uses different formulas, and he's doing some research in that sense as well.
Well, when you get one, if you need somebody over here in the States to test it out, you let me know. I'll be first in line to raise my
I'm
hand for
sure we
sure.
can do that.
Availability of this product. Now we sell it on our website, which I'll put links and everything for that. But do you know right now how fast it's spreading? Like, do you get reports and things like that? Like how many stores it's in now and stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean we're in it. It's a bit difficult because some of the stores buy through distribution and some of them are buying from Fritz. So we only really know the ones that are buying from Fritz. But we do know that we've got the product in regional distribution in quite a few places, but there's still some that have yet to come on board, even though we've got demand there. It's also available on an Amazon site as well, so you can get it nationally if you need to. But if your local store doesn't carry it and you want them to carry it, then all I would suggest to do is, bring it up with them, explain why you want to get it, and usually most stores, if they get enough people coming in asking for something, will start to look at it, and if their distributor doesn't have it, then they'll probably pester the distributor. So we're still in the kind of populating the whole kind of distribution chain, and some areas it's a lot easier to get than others.
Yeah, I mean, it's been flying off of our shelves. I mean, it's been doing extremely well, and we've had to reorder twice in 3 weeks, I think it is, and we've had customers reorder already. So we have quite a few customers that are regulars that order from us every week, and they have a lot of tanks, and so they're feeding a lot of foods, and they've already reordered Vitalis. Yeah. So that's exciting. I mean, that means they got a product that they but their fish really liked and are doing well on it. And I agree with what you said. fish stores are in the business of making money. As hard as that is to hear, it's true. If they get enough people walking through the door, even if it's just one person over and over and over again, if there's enough demand for it, they're going to look for it. They're going to search for it. And it's not hard to find. Fritz being the primary distributor, but then, I know it's accessible to me through like 2 or 3 different distributors that we deal with. So it's not a difficult product to find, but it is something that's still new to us here on the retail side in the United States. So hopefully this podcast, among other promotion that I'll do on the KG Tropicals channel, and I know Jason has already done, hopefully we get the word out there quick that this is a great product that not only your fish will consume, but will also thrive on thanks to what y'all are doing over there in the UK. It's a beautiful thing.
Thank you. Thanks, John. And it's been great to be on the podcast. And it's a shame I missed Jason, but hopefully you'll see Vitalis throughout the States, and we'll be bringing some new stuff in as well in the near future.
I'm excited about it for sure. I love, as I said before, I love people that are thinking outside the box and doing things differently. I love that. And listen, nothing more needs to be said other than if the public aquariums, which have multi-million-dollar operations, if they're feeding this food, that's all you need to know. Forget about all the other stuff. If that's what they're feeding, then it's really good. So I think this is a brand that is going to catch on very quickly. I think it's going to take off, and I think you're going to be glad that it's available in the United States now. I think we're going to clean it up and love it. Or I shouldn't say clean it up. That's the wrong way of saying it. We're going to take it all in, and we're going to sell you out quick because it is that good of a product. So thank you so much for doing this. And I do apologize that Jason wasn't able to be here, but he is a busy guy. He's running around doing a million things, but you know what? So are you. And I very much appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's late in the day for you there. So I want to let you go on and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thanks, John.
Thank you all so much. Thank everybody for listening to this episode, and we will see you. Jason will be back next week.